Okay, we're going to do a quick review of the notes for the early humans test that is coming up. The first notes that we're going to review is the text framing that we did in class. And a couple of things that I want to kind of point out are the roles of the individuals over here in the vocab words from page 9 in the textbook. The first one is the historian, and the historian is really the person who is going to study but also write about things in the past. Then we also have the archaeologist, pardon the handwriting, but these are the people who are digging up for evidence of humans, human remains, items, artifacts, and things they left behind. And in that regard, we also have the term artifact and fossil. And the big difference we want to think about is that fossil was the remains of something that was once living, whether it was a plant or an animal, and an artifact is something that is man-made. So even if they took animal bones and created a tool or a weapon out of it, then that item now becomes an artifact. And then the last group of people was the anthropologist, which really focus on groups of people and their development within groups. The next page that we had was the pages 10 and 11 from the textbook, and the focus here was really on the Paleolithic era and the transition from what was known as the hunter-gatherer phase. When early humans were considered nomads, they moved from place to place in search of food, specifically animals to hunt and plants, wild plants to gather for food. And then it talked a little bit about adapting to their environment, specifically with the Ice Age coming and looking at the development of fire and how that allowed them to survive in that harsh environment. Then we have the language, art, and religion, and very simple at this point in history in terms of the art and language that was being expressed, not as sophisticated as we'll see with some of the later civilizations. And then we do have the development of tools. Obviously during the Stone Age they were using stone tools, and that changes during the Bronze and Iron Ages into bronze and iron tools. So that's the first section. And kind of some reiterating points is we talked about this development of what was called the Neolithic times. And the Neolithic means the New Stone Age. And this is a huge detail to remember for the test, but also in terms of the development of human history, which is this development of farming, which is clearly circled or squared out here. And this allows early humans to stay in one place and begin the settlement of villages, which leads to communities and ultimately to civilizations. So this is a huge, huge deal and marks the transition from Paleolithic to Neolithic times. It is at this time they domesticate plants, which means putting them where they want them and planting them in a certain location, as well as the domestication of animals for use, such as pulling carts and wagons and helping plow, but also raising animals for a food source. And again, it allows them to settle in one place. And we talk a little bit about this development of settlements and how that helps them, and there's a few benefits to settled life. Clearly, we developed more trade due to the increase in population and increase in food being produced. We have more food, we have more people, more workers, and we also have the development of specialization of jobs. So people are able to do different work. We have the invention or the use of metal starting, and because of that we have more or better tools and weapons that are allowed or are able to be used by the early humans. And then we move into section 2, which has a lot more notes, but I've kind of starred some of the really important ones here. And one of the first initial pieces that we're focusing on is the development of civilization. And here are the 6 components that every civilization needs to have. And as we move on down, we really focus a lot on the river valleys and why they were important. And the number one reason is it provided fresh water for farming, which they needed, but it also helped with trade and transportation. And we talked a little bit about the Tigris and Euphrates rivers being the 2 rivers that surrounded Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia being this very early civilization in what is now the current Middle East. And then we talked about irrigation, the system of bringing water to crops, whether using a dike, a canal, any sort of channel, but a method or a system of bringing water to your fields. And then we moved on down to a region in Mesopotamia, in southern Mesopotamia, called Sumer. And this was the ancient Sumerians, which we'll talk a little bit more on the backside. And then we talked about the city-states, which were a lot of these independent cities that had their own government. We real briefly talked about their religion. We'll get into more detail as we get into more developed civilizations, but they believed in many gods, which was a hallmark of early civilizations. And many of the early rulers were kings, and a lot of them were based on military prowess, so they were kind of warlords in that respect. And then we move to the other content that talks a lot about kind of the life in Sumer and some of their inventions, which are pretty important. And one of them is they developed this social class, which is one of the pieces of a civilization. The upper, middle, and lower. Not very cleverly named, but kind of to the point. Men and women did have different roles, and a lot of slaves they had in these early civilizations, as all of them did, but their slaves were based upon prisoners of war as well as criminals. We also have the development of artisans, and these are skilled workers who created things, primarily out of, as you see here, metal products, cloth, and pottery. And then we have the development, and this is a huge development in history, and this is a Sumerian contribution to the world, at least in this region, which was writing. And the primary uses of writing very early on was to keep records of business transactions, but also to communicate ideas, and those are kind of similar forms of ways we use writing even today. And cuneiform was the early form of writing that the Sumerians developed. And then the people who could actually do the reading and writing, which was not a very large group of people in the population, they were called scribes. And then we move on down and we have some of the advances. And this is a really important section to kind of take note of in terms of preparing and understanding what really the Sumerians' contributions to society were. And one of them was this big piece of literature, which is kind of we think of as one of the oldest stories in the world. And it was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then we move on down in some of their advances in the area of science and math. We have the wagon wheel, the sailboat, the plow, geometry, a 12-month calendar, a basic number system, all of which allowed them to kind of develop as a society and as a civilization. And we move on down, we have a couple more just kind of key terms, one of which is an empire, which is many lands kind of underneath one ruler. And then we have the development of this large city called Babylon. And Babylon was one of the really initial powerful cities in the Mesopotamian region. And that leads us to our really first kind of famous person, and that is Hammurabi. And he was a king of Babylon, but what we need to focus on is what he did. And this is written, he created the first written code of laws. It wasn't that it was the first laws that existed in the land, but it was the first one to be written down, and everybody was held accountable to the same set of laws. And the two big takeaways from that, as was already mentioned, it was the first written law code, and it was also a step towards a fair justice system. It wasn't completely fair because there were different laws or different consequences depending on your social class, but it was a step in the right direction from what they used to have. And you can see some of the people thought it was fair and some thought they were cruel, and here were some of the reasons that individuals thought that. And then the last area that we're studying is the Assyrians and Chaldean empires that were in the region of Mesopotamia, and we'll focus on the Assyrians first. And these are some of their contributions that we talked about in class, one of which is they had a reorganized military. They built one of the first libraries for housing of their literature. They were the first group that really developed and used iron weapons, which was an improvement upon bronze. They had a sophisticated road system complete with kind of pit stops or rest areas. They divided their land and organized the actual empire into provinces, which is kind of similar to our modern day states. And they really started honing in their military abilities with the development of war machines, battering rams, siege ladders, and various siege machines. And then we move over to the Chaldean Empire, and they had some other contributions that some would consider more valuable in the areas of science and math. One of them is they kind of came up with that 7-day calendar that we even still use today. A architectural contribution was the development of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which was a pretty big feat in itself due to the fact that it was in a non-arid location. It was very hot. It was in the desert, and they found a way to pump water to it. They did rebuild the city of Babylon, and that kind of goes with their architectural theme. They also created a sundial, which was used as an early primitive way of telling time. Now is more of a decorative piece in most places. And then they are the ones that are really started looking at the stars, mapping the stars, the planets, and the phases of the moon, and having a sense of the role of an astronomer and where to go with that.